Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the final seminar of the day at Love Business East Midlands. I have been your host, Rob Brown, for the day. This is my final introduction because the words I'll be saying after this were thank you and goodbye and thank you for coming and travel safely home. So please, for the last seminar day, would you give a very warm round of applause from Love Business East Midlands for Toni Robinson.
I can look this way. Oh, that would have been easier. Afternoon, everybody. Hello. Thank you for coming today. I know that this is the last one of the day and you probably all want to sort of start to move around. So thank you for sparing half an hour to come and see me today and understand a little bit more about HR and what's going on in employment law today. What we're going to do today is we're going to take a brief tour of employment legislation, and I really do want that to be really brief today. We're going to look at more focus on, we'll take 5 minutes on the employment law, and then we'll take maybe 25 minutes or so just going through some of the major pitfalls in HR today and how you can maybe overcome them. And then we will have 5 minutes or so for questions and answers, but because of the noise around the building today, it might be easier to come and see me at the stand afterwards and ask any questions you want around HR and employment law, and I'll be happy to help you. By the end of our session today, I'm hoping that you'll be inspired to take the HR actions that your business needs in order to succeed. HR is such an important part of your business strategy. It's so important that you are confident that you'll have the right to manage your employees. It's so often today that I speak to businesses that they're so scared of managing their employees because of the employment legislation that's around. And hopefully today, after this session, you'll be a lot more confident that you have got the right to manage your employees. No matter how hard it looks, you have got the right. And you need to overcome the fear that's often associated with some of those problems. So we'll take just 5 minutes just to have a look. I know the government today are looking at, the coalition are trying to make employment legislation easier and they're trying to cut it. Okay, so the things that you'll hear in the media are the things that the government will want you to hear, which is that legislation's being halved and, you know, we're going to take so many thousands of statutes out of legislation. However, we can't take our eye off the ball. It's an ever-changing landscape in employment law today, and we need to be mindful of the fact that, you know, there are things that are going on all of the time that you need to be aware of. However, so I don't sit here for 20 minutes and talk about employment law, what I have got for you in your lovely pack that we've bribed you with to come here today is you've got an employment law clock. And on there, it tells you everything that should have happened in 2012 and everything that's going to happen in 2013 in employment legislation. And on the back of that, that tells you the case law that's came out in 2012 and some of the case law that we're expecting in 2013. So I really encourage you to get this out, pop it on your wall, pop it in your desk, and make sure you just periodically just have a look at it to make sure you're keeping your eye on the ball and keeping your, I like to call it keeping your peepers peeled, people, because it's really important that you know it. Okay, so what you can tell from the slides and from the handout is that this is an ever-changing landscape and you really do need to be keeping an eye on it. I mean, if you look at the review of the Agency Workers Directive, just as one example, that only came out, you know, sort of a couple of years ago, if that, and they're already talking about changing it. So we've got to just keep our eye on things. However, this leads me to this part, okay, which is more about the HR things. Now, at QDOS, we run an advice line. Many of you will have access to it through the Chamber of Commerce, but we run an advice line, and we get 33,000 clients a year that ring us around employee problems. And many of those are small, medium businesses, and some of them are sole traders taking on their first employee. And these are the most common things that people ring us about. And these are the common things that people get confused about, or they think there's some myth around employment law that stops them actually taking action with their staff. I'm hoping we get a chance to cover all 10 today. We might not. If you want me to cover the ones that we don't get to today, I'll be at stand E6 afterwards. But what I'd just like to do is just talk through this 10. Does that sound like a good plan to everyone? Nod? Great. Okay. The first one is sort of, are you managing your unmanageable? At some point today, I challenge you not to raise your eyebrows, not to roll your eyes, not to have someone's name come into your head and have a little giggle thinking, I've got that. You know, I guarantee that when I go through these, you will get to that point, okay? So the first one is, are you managing your unmanageable? Everyone's got one of these people. Everyone's got one, or has had one in the past, that has got a person that makes themselves so impossible to manage. So the answer is, you don't. Well, no, that's not the answer. The answer is, you shouldn't be afraid to manage that person. Now, they make it so difficult, and they'll come up with 1,000 reasons why you should not be doing what you're doing, or they'll avoid your meetings, they'll avoid your calls, they'll do a million things with emails that will just drive you absolutely mad, but you avoid it because you're so scared of dealing with the issue. But you shouldn't be, okay? You have got the right to manage your staff, okay? And you should. You have to take control of the situation. You have to take control. How many times I've seen the employee leading the process? That's just not right. In any way, it's not right. What you need to be doing, okay, is don't put it off. Don't put it off. I challenge you, if you've got one of these people, to go back to the office tomorrow and start the conversations. You know, structure your management plan. Stick to your plan. Don't be put off by it. You can do it. You are allowed to do it. Okay? But the one thing I will ask you to do is accept that this will take time. It isn't going to all happen tomorrow because you've gone back really enthused because you can do it. It will take time. But I guarantee you that time will be well invested, because if that person either turns it around and becomes your model employee, or they accept that actually this isn't going to be right for them, the longer term is you'll end up in a better place as a company, and you should do it. Okay? If you've got one of those unmanageable people and you want to talk to me about them, specifically about them, please come over to me afterwards. I'm dying to chat to people. Okay. The one thing that we've seen throughout the recession and the downturn is, when is a redundancy not a redundancy? One of the biggest calls, I did 40 calls in a day once, and 39 of them were on actually redundancy. What I will tell you is probably half of those weren't really a redundancy. They're actually a performance management problem. And what happens with that performance management is that people want a shortcut to deal with it. Now, unfortunately, and I have a lay member of the Leicester Tribunal here, unfortunately they will tell you and echo the fact that they actually will see through it. The tribunals will see through the fact that you are trying to do a redundancy for what actually is a performance management situation. And that's one of the things that I'd probably say is one of our biggest pitfalls today, is that we've avoided doing that redundancy of the performance management in order to get a process done in a month that will technically take 6 months to do. What I do encourage you to do is do it properly. And again, manage the individual. Unfortunately, if you do end up using a redundancy as a shortcut for performance management, what you will end up with is a potential unfair dismissal with quite a nice compensation to it. Or a nasty one, whichever way you want to see it. So I just want to really sort of help you avoid it and say, you know, if you are going to do it, it will be a commercial risk to do it. Absence. That makes the heart grow fonder, apparently. I've never known it to. Not in all the years that I've been helping employers. How many people have actually said to me over the years, oh, I can't possibly deal with the long-term sickness because they haven't exhausted their SSP? No, you can. Just because they're still on SSP doesn't mean to say that you you can't manage the situation. In fact, recent studies have actually said you are better to deal with it sooner rather than later. So instead of dealing with the stress and depression, which people used to say, don't contact the doctor for 4 weeks because they're not going to tell you anything. You'll end up paying £100 for a report where you're not going to learn anything. Well, that's simply not true anymore. What they do say is contact sooner rather than later, because that's the easiest way to get them back into work quicker. The longer they're off, the longer chance there are, the higher chance of them not returning to work. So actually, what the new research and the new thoughts are is actually you do it sooner rather than later. In terms of the other thing with absence that's very often said to us is, I'm not allowed to, I can't manage it because they're off sick. I'm not allowed to manage them because they're off sick. I can't possibly do anything. Well, that's not true either. And what it is around this is you can't question the validity of their absence. If it's supported by a doctor's note or anything like that, you can't really question the validity of the absence. What you can do is say, actually, your absence rate is actually unacceptable to us as a business. And you can do that. And you can take them through a disciplinary process to say that actually your absence ratio is too high for us. It's not acceptable. You can absolutely do that. And you should do that. Why should it be that you are sitting there with people with an absence ratio of, sort of 8 to 10%, while the people of, less than 1% absence are having to do their work? You should deal with it. You're allowed to deal with it. You just have to follow a process in order to do it. Okay, I have got a good example for my silence is golden. I remember a guy who he always thought this was a get out of jail free card, and everybody thinks that leaving issues for quite some time is their get out of jail free card. So I had a guy, he called me once and he said, Toni, I have somebody, he's been late today. He's on a final written warning for lateness already, and I really would like to now take it to the next level. I need to dismiss him. Oh, okay. So when was he last late? Yesterday. So when did you give him his final written? Yesterday. Okay, how long's he been with you? 26 years. Oh, okay. So in that 26 years, how many times has he been late? Oh, every day for the last 26 years. Right, okay. So I was kind of like, well, you're not going to deal with that in 3 days. That's just not going to happen. Keeping these get out of jail free cards in your back pocket simply doesn't work. I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but it doesn't work. What they do, in fairness, this guy, do you remember the foot and mouth crisis? Our last food scandal? Basically, this guy, he was a farmhand, and he really wanted to be able to dismiss him because he had issues with the farmhands, and he'd got, sort of his cattle and all the things like that. So whilst I sympathised with what his problem was, he was going about it all the wrong way. He could deal with what his issue was and how we needed to get to the end result, but he wasn't going about it the right way, which would cause him a problem. There was a way to deal with it, it just wasn't his way. Okay. So what I would say, and this is a frequent thing, I give you an extreme example, but actually, it happens all of the time. I've got a very large business owner who actually did exactly the same thing, not to the same extreme, but he did exactly the same thing. He actually thought this get out of jail free card was his way of achieving, what he needed to achieve with this individual. There is always a way to deal with the individual, but you just need to go about it the right way. Okay. My fifth one is rules are meant to be broken. Well, whilst they can be flexed sometimes, the procedures that you use for disciplinary and grievances and redundancies can't necessarily be broken. They might be a little bit bent sometimes, but definitely not broken. Unfortunately, today, one of the highest unfair dismissal reasons is because the process that has been used has not been fair and reasonable and has not been what you've said it was going to be. So when you've issued your disciplinary or your grievance procedures, you've not necessarily followed it. Okay? If you don't follow what you say you're going to do, okay, that can be seen as a procedural error. and therefore the tribunals will say, no, I'm not accepting that. However, if you follow the rules that you say you're going to do, so say you're going to do it, you will be absolutely fine. As long as your reasons are fair, you'll be absolutely fine. Unfortunately, with smaller businesses, we often find that we say, and actually this is a very common phrase, verbal contract, not worth the paper it's written on. Yes, it is. Unfortunately, in employment law, that doesn't really work, because a multitude of employers today still say, I'm not bound by it. I didn't issue it, so I'm not bound by it. And they're not bound by it because I've not issued it. Well, that's not true. Okay, what will happen? First of all, everybody needs to issue a contract of employment or a written statement of particulars within 8 weeks. Okay, if that hasn't been issued and there is a dispute, what will happen is an employment tribunal, should it get that far, will not only make an award based on the fact that you've not issued it, they'll actually decide what your contract is. And that could be something that you didn't intend it to be. So they'd look at the job description, they'd look at your advert of how you recruited them in the first place, they'd look at all the custom and practice of what's been going on in that time period. So they would actually make a decision on what that contract is, and you could lose out as an employer for that. So what I would encourage you to do, okay, you can go on our website, and there are written statements of particulars on there that you can download for free. And I encourage you to go on there and download it. I encourage you to use it. And if you haven't issued your staff with terms, issue them, because otherwise you could end up with a bit of a sticky situation. And this very much leads back onto that in terms of the failure to sign and the right to change. If what happens is, and in the same way that employers and employees do exactly the same, they say, I didn't sign the contract, so I'm not bound by it. Or the employers will say, well, they didn't sign it, so they're not bound by it. So in actual fact, that's not true. Okay? If you have continued to issue a salary in return for labour, or you've accepted a salary in return for providing labour, you have actually accepted the terms that was issued to you by virtue of your own silence. So actually that becomes the contract that exists between you anyway. Okay? So how many employers have come to me and said, that's all right, I can change it because they've not agreed to it. Or I don't have to give that amount of notice because, quite frankly, they didn't sign it. That's not true. That's simply not true. You do need to be careful what you're putting in your contracts to make sure that it is what you want to do. Because if you are, and I do know a company that has only recently had an MD with a 12-month notice period and didn't want to pay the 12-month notice period, well, don't put it in there in the first place then. Because if you don't want to do something, don't put it in there. Do what you want to do with your contracts. That's what you should be doing. Making reference to previous employees, how many of you actually think you can't provide a bad reference? Oh, that's good. You all give bad references. Okay. Bad references. You can, of course, give a reference, but it has to be factual and it has to be honest. So if that person has not been brilliant and they've not been your model employee, explain that. As long as you've got the evidence in your file to suggest what you're saying is true, then tell them. It's your obligation to do that. As fellow employers to fellow employers, you would want to know if you're passing on somebody who is not going to be able to do a job that they are going for. Because I guarantee you've inherited somebody that way. You've had somebody that's perhaps you've thought that. No, you should think about what references you're giving. It's fair and it's reasonable. But the answer is not to give one. The answer is actually to give one but be honest about it. This is an example where how many people that I speak to say, actually there are no risks. This person's only been with me 77 days. It's just, what could they possibly do? This is, if I told you the whole story, you would absolutely be laughing about the fact that this employee had been with this employer for 77 days. And unfortunately, it was a sexual harassment case, in which case she claimed sex discrimination. And the employer said, they can't possibly do that. They've only been with me 77 days. You know, she literally has not been with me that long. The employment tribunals didn't see it that way. And certainly when we had the case reviewed by outside counsel, the settlement was £30,000. They had done something horrendously stupid. However, what we can point out is 77 days is no time at all to be employed with somebody and to be gaining £30,000 in a compensation settlement. Discrimination laws, they count from before you've even started the recruitment process, really. They come into play from day one, you know, and we need to be mindful of the fact that we have a multitude of discrimination laws. But whilst I'm sort of reminding you of it, what I'm trying to say is actually deal with it, but deal with it properly. Don't think that the risks aren't there just because they've got this short length of service. They are there. I mean, you need to be mindful of them, but if you follow the right process, it will be absolutely fine. I love Alan Sugar, and I love The Apprentice. I love the fact that he sits there and says, "You're fired," to everybody that he thinks is the lowest of the group. It's done me no favours whatsoever when I'm speaking to employers, though, because what they think they can do is just go, well, I can fire them whenever I want. Yeah, well, you can if your pockets are deep enough and you want to pay the price. You can do that. However, you know, although the coalition are still talking about firing at will, and they are talking about the American culture of being able to, with less than 10 employees, to be able to start hiring and firing at will, that's not in place today. And if you did do what Lord Sugar does every week, then unfortunately, you know, my friend Sarah at the front will be seeing you at Leicester Tribunal quite soon. So I would suggest that we don't follow Lord Sugar as an example and maybe look at something a little bit more robust in terms of a process to deal with these issues. Today we've took a very brief tour around some of the pitfalls, okay? I wanted you to be a little bit more inspired to take the actions that your business needs. I wanted you to be able to think, actually, that reminds me of Peter in our office. We need to do something with Peter. You know, I wanted you to be able to think that, do you know what? I want to go and talk to somebody about it. I need to be able to deal with Peter. I don't know who Peter is, but we need to deal with him. Okay, I wanted you to be able to overcome the fear factor by knowing that you've got the right to deal with it. It's so often that the tail's wagging the dog and not the other way around, and we need to stop that. You need to stop that today. Okay? You need to be confident that you've got the right to manage your employees. We at QDOS do a 24/7 health and safety and HR advice line. It's coupled with a website. You can get indemnity insurance, consultancy service and litigation support. However, what I want you to do is I want you to be able to go away today. I want you to tackle the issues without fear, okay? I want you to get the right support, whether that's with QDOS, whether that's with your current provider, whether that's with the chamber, whatever it is, I want you to go and get the right support, okay? I want you to have your awareness raised, take the actions you need to take. But I will put a massive but in there. You will all need to do this. Be aware of the costs that are associated with it, okay? Because they don't need to be unmanageable. You can deal with this. I would like you to get support to do it to avoid the risks that we've talked about, but it doesn't have to cost you the earth, okay? So look around for it. I would like to thank you all for coming.